This is Campus Exonerated's mic test. 1, 2, 3. All right. I believe I can hear myself, so I hope you can hear me. Welcome to Campus Exonerated, NJIT's Pre-Law Society radio show. This is a general disclaimer that the views and opinions expressed by Liz Finnegan, me, the host of the show, are solely my own and do not represent the views, opinions, or official stance of the New Jersey Institute of Technology, NJIT, or its community. The content of this show is for informational purposes only and should not be attributed to NJIT or its affiliates. Listeners are encouraged to form their own opinions and seek additional sources of information to make informed decisions. Now that caveat's out of the way, this episode 2 of Campus Exonerated, I will be discussing the current events in Palestine. I realize that this is a sensitive topic, but I think it's important to address the issue of an occupying state committing a genocide. Additionally, I realize that many people may not agree with the before statement. But before you turn me off, I implore you to try to listen, because the so-called war did not start on October 7th, 2023. October 7th was, of course, a tragedy that claimed approximately 1,400 Israeli lives, and the militant group Hamas committed that act of terror. They are also holding still 200 Israeli hostages, which is additionally a war crime. So I'm not in favor of Hamas. I don't think anyone speaking on behalf of the Palestinians are in favor of Hamas, and I do condemn their actions. I'm not going to try to justify the tragedy of October 7th. Additionally, Hamas doesn't speak for the majority of Palestinians, as they are estimated to have only 30,000 armed forces in the Gaza Strip. In the Gaza Strip, that's about 1% of the total population. But today, I will hopefully provide some context to the state of Israel and the history surrounding Palestine. So after World War I, the League of Nations granted Britain a mandate to govern Palestine, which includes present-day Israel and Palestinian territories. After World War II, Britain governed Palestine until 1948, which is when Israel was created, which was supported by the modern Zionist movement, which after the Holocaust and everything in the early 20th century that persecuted the Jewish population, sought to establish a Jewish homeland. So the Zionist movement purpose was to create Israel a Jewish state in Palestine. After it was declared a state in 1948, it led to an Israeli-Arab war called Nakba. It is estimated that 750,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homeland, becoming refugees. Their descendants are also considered refugees, leaving about 5.9 million Palestinians unable to return to their homeland in modern-day Israel. It's also important to note that being critical of the Zionist movement and its subsequent state of Israel is not anti-Semitic. Critics of Zionism have a problem with the displacement of indigenous people from their homeland, not with the Judaism religion. Being anti-Semitic is unacceptable, and being critical of Israel should not be an excuse to be anti-Semitic. In the past 75 years, Israel has occupied the state of Palestine. It has had the support of the United Nations and those countries within the UN to do so. It increased its occupation within those years, notably in 1967, in which it claimed East Jerusalem and Golan Heights, which were both previously Palestinian territories, which the UN initially did not approve of, but under The Trump administration, the U.S., decided to recognize its annexation of those territories, and the international community follows suit. In the past 15 years, Hamas, a militant Palestinian group founded in the 1980s, and Israel have had many clashes. In 2008, Hamas and Israel had a 6-month ceasefire, but on November 4th, Israel raided Gaza, killing 6 Hamas soldiers, which led to Hamas retaliating, which thus broke the ceasefire. The resulting bombardment from Israel claimed between 1,400 and 1,600 Palestinians. 13 Israeli deaths were noted. In 2012, Operation Pillar of Defense, another military operation against Hamas, led to 6 Israeli deaths and approximately 770 Palestinians died, over half of which were civilians. In 2014, Operation Protective Edge had about 2,000 Palestinians die. About 300 were children, and 70% were civilians. 73 Israeli deaths were marked, 6 of which were civilians. There have been many other instances. I'm not going to say that these are all the clashes that has happened between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but those are notable ones in which many civilians died, and the proportion of Israeli to Palestinian deaths were really shown. But the overall trend that has happened in the last 75 years is that the majority of people who get hurt in these operations or clashes are civilians, Palestinian civilians, which, as Israeli is the occupying state over them, they have the responsibility to protect the civilians. But overall, they are displaced from their homes, if they have homes to go back to. Several hundreds, thousands in the past 20 years, homes have been bombed. They've lost their homes, especially Israel has this what's it called? Israel has a setup in place in which if Jewish people from around the world would like to move to Israel, they are incentivized to, especially American Jewish people. And in those moments in which Jewish people move, they displace more Palestinians from the homes, so more Jewish citizens can move in. So not only in the Gaza Strip are their homes being bombed or destroyed, they're also kicked out of their homes, not only in the Gaza Strip, but in the West Bank, which Hamas is not in. Additionally, half of the Gaza Strip's population, which is about 2.2 million, are children, which means the majority of people suffering from these conflicts or bombings, or over half of them, are little kids. Currently, the situation is pretty dire. As of today, in this radio show, half of the Gaza Strip's homes for about 1.4 million Palestinians are gone. The official death count for Palestinians is over 5,000. The majority of those are civilians. And right now, that is the only official confirmed deaths. Because of the extensive bombing, there are a lot of bodies buried underneath the rubble, and they haven't been able to identify everyone. About 2,000 of the official death count are children. Humanitarian aid is being slowed down by Israel. As of today, only 54 trucks of humanitarian aid were allowed past the Rafah crossing, which is the Egyptian border. Many countries have pledged millions of dollars in aid For humanitarian reasons, notably the U.S. pledged $100 million. I believe Ireland pledged like $20 million. And the other UN nations have pledged humanitarian aid, but as of currently, Israel is not really allowing that in. Israel has cut off water, food, and electricity to the Gaza Strip. Hospitals are running low on supplies. Doctors are being forced to operate in hallways by the flashlights of their phones with no anesthetics. Whether or not you believe that Israel has a right to exist, the actions that they've taken since October 7th and in general go against international law. I'm going to read several of the Article 8 of the Geneva Convention, notably Article 8, Section 2A and B, which describe war crimes. 2A notes extensive destruction and appropriation of property not justified by military necessity and carried out unlawfully and wantonly is a war crime. I believe bombing over 50% of civilian homes in the Gaza Strip would warrant that. 2B has several intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population as such, or against individual civilians not taking direct part in hostilities. In the northern part of Gaza, Israel told civilians to evacuate. They gave a couple hours for 1.1 million people in the North Gaza Strip to leave. And then during them leaving, in which people were heading south, Israel was still bombing and has hit several convoys or people trying to flee, which led in more civilian deaths. Intentionally directing attacks against civilian objects, that is, objects which are not military objectives. Intentionally launching an attack in the knowledge that such an attack will cause incidental loss of life or injury to civilians and damage to civilian objects or widespread, long-term, and severe damage to the natural environment, which would be clearly excessive in relation to the concrete and direct overall military advantage anticipated. So what Israel's hoping to do is they're waging a so-called war against Hamas, and their goal is to get rid of Hamas, which is a terrorist group. But in trying to fight this group that is only approximately 30,000 people, they are endangering the lives of over 2 million. Another one, attacking or bombarding by whatever means towns, villages, dwellings, or buildings which are undefended and are not military objectives. I do believe, again, 50% of civilian homes. Additionally, churches have been bombed, hospitals have been bombed, and even UN safety buildings have been bombed. The transfer indirectly or directly by the occupying power of parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies, or the deportation or transfer of all or parts of this population of the occupied territory within or outside this territory. So that war crime, I guess, has been several decades in the making, in which it displaced the indigenous people in 1967, 1948, over the past several years. It's displaced people in the West Bank, Gaza, etc. Intentionally directing attacks against buildings, dedicated religion, education, art, science, charitable purpose, historical monuments, hospitals, and places where the sick and wounded are collected, provided they are not military objectives. I know when a hospital was bombed several days ago that it was disputed among Israeli and Palestinian sources of whether it came from the Israeli side or the Palestinian side. I believe independent sources have verified that it was indeed a rocket from a not Hamas, I don't think, another militant group. But before it was verified that, I saw a lot of people trying to justify the actions of bombing the hospital if it had been done by the Israelis. And their points were that Hamas has a lot of underground tunnels in the Gaza Strip, and they were claiming that there could have been tunnels underneath the hospital. And I think that's a lot of the reasonings for bombing these civilian places, is that Hamas could potentially be there. And I don't think that justifies bombing these places that are filled with injured people, filled with refugees from their homes, filled with people who are just trying to survive at this point. Additionally, Israeli forces has used white phosphorus in the past 2 weeks, which can be used either for marking, signaling, or obscuring as a weapon, or as a weapon to set fires that burn people and objects. It has a significant incendiary effect that can severely burn people, set structures, fields, and other civilian objects in the vicinity on fire. The use of white phosphorus in Gaza, one of the most densely populated areas in the world, magnifies the risk to civilians, and is also violating an international war crime under the Geneva Convention, which prohibits employing poisoned or poisoned weapons. So you might ask, okay, so Liz, why are you talking about this Palestinian genocide that we're watching happen over social media? Why can't you just turn off social media? And I do think I and the listeners who are listening to this radio show have that privilege of being able to turn off our phones and look away from the media. And I don't believe that is the right course of action to take here. The situation is just too dire, I believe. The United States, in which I'm a citizen of, and I believe many of the people who are listening to this radio show are, the United States directly supports Israel. In the past 7 years, we have given them $3.6 billion per year in order to fund their military exploits and protect Israel from these terrorist groups. So we've spent about $25 billion in American taxpayer money, which is some of my tax money, and our politicians are greatly in support of Israel. Joe Biden has just proposed a $100 billion spending bill that supports the war in Ukraine and the war in Israel. I believe the majority of that fund would be for Ukraine, but a significant amount of money would also be given to Israel, and not for humanitarian aid. I believe $14 billion of that is proposed to support the IDF, which is the force that Israel uses to put out its bombs, etc. The U.S. has also made it a point that no one else will be involved in this conflict, it has sent 2 aircraft carriers to the region in order to dissuade anyone who might think of joining the war, aka anyone who's supporting Palestine, which ironically is Russia. So, the United States has been in play of supporting Israel since its creation. In the past 20 years, it's been our foothold. It's our so-called, it's the so-called democracy in the Middle East. And Israel and the United States have had a close relationship in that time. And also, the media's portrayal of the situation in Gaza has led to a lot of Islamophobic attacks. Notably, I believe last week in Chicago, a young Palestinian boy, age 6, was stabbed to death, and his mother was sent to the hospital in critical condition by his landlord, who, while attacking him, was saying "death to Palestinians," I believe, or some other anti-Palestinian rhetoric, and I believe anti-Muslim attacks are up by 1,000% in the United States, which has been reflective of since the war on terror began after 9/11. There was a lot of anti-Muslim rhetoric in the United States and has continued to this day. And because of this portrayal by the Western media that this conflict is between religions rather than a occupying state and the indigenous people, it leads to people having this either anti-Semitic or anti-Muslim rhetoric, when in reality that's not what this situation is about. This situation is about the state of Israel occupying a land that it is not indigenous to and did not have a right to, but it was created in 1948, and the past 75 years of conflict between Palestinians and Israelis has stemmed from that. It is important to be noted that before 1948, Palestine it's not all Muslim. It was between Christians, Jews, Muslims, because the area of Israel and Palestine is very important to the 3 Abrahamic religions, and thus they all shared that space. But Israel does not want to share that space. It's been making strides in order to occupy more Palestinian territory in the last 20 years, or not 20 years, 75 years. And currently, Israel officials have even dehumanized Palestinians. Like, that's also another reason why this conflict or this struggle has been so hard, because even now, Israel's officials, even the Prime Minister of Israel, stated that Israel's current war on Gaza is a struggle between the children of light and the children of darkness, between humanity and the law of the jungle. So Israel is dehumanizing Palestinians, and that's why in the Western media, which heavily supports Israel, hasn't really been focusing on Palestinian deaths. From what I've seen, independent footage away from usual news outlets, it's sharing a lot of pain of the Palestinian people, and it's showing what it's like on the ground. And the New York Times can only focus on how Hamas gave back two Israeli hostages like 2 days ago, rather than the additional 500 Palestinians that were killed last night. So what I urge you to do, if you're listening and if you made it this far, is to reach out to your representatives. Call them, email them. Right now, whether or not you believe there should be a free Palestine or not, the important thing is that this situation needs to come to a ceasefire. Israel cannot continue bombing Gaza. It needs to allow water, food, electricity to come back to the Gaza Strip. Hospitals, humanitarian aid needs to be put into Gaza. So even if you support Israel and support funding them more, what's important right now is that you take a stance as to stop the bombing. Palestinians right now are begging you to pay attention to their struggle, and they're begging people to speak up about them rather than just focusing on, of course, the innocent Israeli civilians that are being held hostage, etc., but they are dying. The situation is that I've seen too many kids in body bags over the past 2 weeks, and I'm not even there. Like, the scene is pretty horrifying on the ground. And if you saying to your representatives, hey, I'm from this district, you're my representative, and I would really like you to take a stance on for calling for a ceasefire. And if that helps even a little, I think that is the stance that you need to take. As a citizen of the United States, or as someone living in the United States and contributing to supporting Israel, we need to make it clear that we do not support the continuation of Israel's war crimes. So I beg you, if you're paying attention, please contact your representatives, read up on Palestine, share what is going on in Palestine. If you want to, go to a protest, but basically just keep the word out that this is unacceptable and that you are willing to make that known, whether you support the state of Israel or the state of Palestine. Anyway, that's it for today's episode. I know it wasn't a very pleasant one, and I know that some people may not agree with what I've said, but I think it was a stance that I needed to make personally, and I believe that a lot of people should take, or at least consider taking. So that's it for episode 2 of Campus Exonerated. I'll be back next week, same time, same host. I'll see you then. All right, thanks.